Yeah, and I think it's really about that constant improvement, being a lifelong student of whatever you're doing, whether that's warfare or whether that's writing for me now. I'm a lifelong student, so I'm never going to get to that. Like, I never use the term expert ever on anything. Because I'm always striving to be better tomorrow than I was today. So we have a saying in the SEAL teams, you're going to earn your trident every day.
So we're here at a bookstore, and I wanted to start with books. Your mom was a librarian, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to say that's the competition, but it is the competition bookstore.
Yeah.
Now, talk to me about your early introduction to books and reading. I imagine that was quite formative for you.
Yeah, I can't remember a time when I wasn't engrossed in a book, or surrounded by books, or collecting books, or adding to my library.
Yeah.
Because it was just a natural part of growing up, just like sitting down to dinner with the family or anything else, just having books around and sitting down to read at night before bed, or on vacations during the day, and just having that time was just as natural as anything else that we did. So I can't even remember a time where I had to be forced to read or say, hey, kids, go over there and read. It was just always something I loved to do. And so I always knew that one day that would be my profession.
It doesn't sound like, from what I read, that your parents babied you when you came to books. It sounded like you were reading like the kinds of books you're writing now at a very young age.
Very early age, maybe a little too early in some cases. Because it wasn't like they, after I started reading the things that my parents were reading, which was about fifth grade. Like fifth grade was the kind of transition from kind of the young adult type books and into the stuff my parents were reading. So there's probably like a year there where a lot of what I read, I didn't really comprehend. But then by sixth grade, for sure in sixth grade, I'm reading the exact same things and I'm comprehending all of it. And so, yeah, Tom Clancy, Hunt for Red October came out in fifth grade. So I was engrossed in that. A little technical, for a fifth grader. But then I'm finding David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and AJ Quinnell and JC Pollock and Mark Olden and Louis L'Amour and Stephen Hunter and all these guys in that time frame whose protagonists had backgrounds in Vietnam. So they were either Marine snipers, or they were Army Special Forces, or Navy SEALs, or CIA paramilitary. So I was reading the books with protagonists that had backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. And back then we couldn't get on the internet and just be like Navy SEAL training and look at it or anything. So you had to rely on the very few books out there that were nonfiction, but then the pages of these thrillers. And you'd figure that, hey, David Morrell probably did some research. You couldn't check on it, but you into whatever he's writing about. So I just, I love being transported by those stories and knew that I'd do it in real life.
I remember reading the Clive Cussler books, which were, they were like this thick. And on the back, it was him
and a car
with his classic car that he was writing about in the book. And you're like, oh, this is also a job, and that this is potentially a lucrative job. I remember that was like my sort of first peek into publishing as a thing.
So that was a good idea. So he has two museums, one in Colorado and one in Arizona, and I guess that helps in tax purposes when it's actually a museum that people can go.
But they're just his classic cars,
just his collection. Yeah, it's fantastic. And unfortunately he passed away a couple years ago, but actually just last night I was talking to somebody, and who knows, the museum in Colorado, I think, it's in the trust and all that stuff, but there are a couple cars out there in the Phoenix area that I was asking about if one might if one's up for sale, for someone to let me know, and and preserve that piece of kind of literary history, because I saw those too. I saw the cars in the back of Clive Cussler. I saw the guns in the Mac Bolan novels. Anybody read Mac Bolan here back in the day? Yeah, all right, give it up for Mac Bolan. Yeah, I like it. So he had all those guns in there. So I was always, of course, it was always something completely impractical, like the Desert Eagle 50 cal pistol that he's carrying concealed somehow. But still, as a sixth grader, seventh grader, that was so fantastic to read those things. I absolutely loved them.
I think it gives you a big sense of what you're capable of too in like fifth grade, that you're reading a book that's like 900 pages or whatever, right? Like I think there is something about fiction too, where if you grew up reading those books, then when you want to tackle some big nonfiction thing, you're like, oh yeah, I can read a 1,000-page book. I used to read those when I was 11 or whatever. Like, I think there is something about the genre fiction that makes you put away any sort of intimidation by like a big book.
Yeah, I was never intimidated by the size of any book.
Yes.
That's for sure. And that comes in handy when you pick up like Winds of War and Remembrance by Herman Wouk, which are fantastic, by the way. Historical fiction for kids. I think it's a great introduction to actual historical fiction, like actual reading nonfiction about an event that can sometimes be a little dry.
Yes.
That introduction through historical fiction, like Killer Angels or Winds of War and Remembrance, those are just such great introductions and give us such a great history of like World War II in particular for those
because then when you go and you read the real books, the names are familiar. The names and the places and the sense of what happens.
I remember Guadalcanal. I remember these things. So it's it's a great touch point with history for sure because it's so approachable. Yes. Which is great. It's not super intimidating like it's the history of World War II or like Winston Churchill's memoirs or something like that. It's like, oh boy. But when you approach it from historical fiction standpoint and you're reading about these events through the eyes of a family that's relatable, especially like Herman Wouk does, where you have multi-generationals and it's just, it makes it, you get to know those characters and therefore you get to know the history.
There's a quote about Theodore Roosevelt I like. One of the biographers says, Theodore Roosevelt grows up reading about the great men of history and decides he wants to be just like them. Yeah. And so is it the sense that you're sort of reading about all these characters and then you're like, oh, but you can actually, not just I could write about it, but that I could actually do the stuff that they're doing in the books?
I think it went the other way because I knew earlier that I was going to be in the military and that was just innate. It was in my blood. Hey, in the blood. It was just something, and it was just something that I was drawn towards. And I think a lot of that had to do with my grandfather. He was killed in World War II, but I grew up with pictures of him and his squadron. He was a Marine Corps aviator and flew the Corsair. So that's the plane that had the gull wings that folded up like that. He was killed off Okinawa in 1945. But I grew up with the silk maps they used to give aviators back then, because if you hit the water with a paper map, it would disintegrate, but a silk map would just get wet. Still could use it. And had his Marine Corps aviation wings, had all that stuff. And so I just knew that I was going to serve my country in the military. But so that came first. And then I was researching as much as you can as a young kid, researching anything warfare related, and then terrorism and insurgency and counterinsurgency. And some of my earliest memories of the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis and the ensuing incident at Desert One that happened after that. So all those things were just a part of my childhood, and I still think of them as very formative events. I can remember the Time magazine and Newsweek and the covers of the newspapers of that event in particular. But then as I got older, so then when I reached the ripe old age of 10 and started reading thrillers, then I was like, okay, first military, and then I'm going to write thrillers exactly like the kind that I'm enjoying so much today.
Back in the ancient world, philosophy wasn't abstract, it wasn't theoretical, it was designed to help you live the best life. In Stoicism 101, we have a 2-week course that will introduce you into philosophy that will make you a better person. There's interviews with me, daily lessons that will challenge you to be better, give you new ways of thinking, tackling the problems of life, becoming your best self. As Marcus Aurelius says, you could be good today, but instead you choose tomorrow. Epictetus says, how much longer are you going to wait to demand the best for yourself? Check out our new course, Stoicism 101 at dailystoic.com/101.
Yeah, when actually I interviewed Stephen Pressfield here before this had become a bookstore. He was like the first person that saw it. And he was wearing this World War II bomber jacket that a pilot had given him, and it had the maps sewn inside. Wow. It was really cool.
Yeah. Stephen Pressfield's great. I mean, he obviously has all these amazing books that he has, Afghan Campaign, Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, but he also has a series of books on creativity, and the first one is The War of Art. And I got so much from all of his books, in particular that one and then Turning Pro. They all say, essentially, you're going to have to sit down, be a professional, and do the work. Essentially, that's what he's saying. Don't get distracted, really. But I remember him saying that you're a professional, you're a writer, sit down and write.
Yes.
You don't get writer's block because you don't hear of a trucker getting trucker's block or a dentist getting dentist block. You sit down and you do the work.
Yes.
And so that was to hear that from him was pretty cool. So I've never had to contend with writer's block. And then when I left the military and I was flying to South Africa and then Mozambique for a little research trip, it has asked occupation on that entry form. And so I wrote down author.
There you go.
So I didn't have anything published.
That's when you turned pro.
That's it. In your head, you have to turn pro. And so it was just, okay, now I was a special operator for the last 20 years. Now I'm a writer. Now I'm an author. And I think that really helps put things in perspective and makes you sit down and do the work. 'Cause it's not a hobby. It's not something you're hoping that will happen. You are all in.
I was going to ask you about that. So you have this 20-year career in the military, and then you transition to writing. I want to talk about transitions. But I do think writing is easier when you've had a job before or a career before, because then you're able to be like, this is a job. This isn't, I think a lot of people think of creative professions as being this sort of ethereal, fun, the muses visit you, but it's a job, and you have to be an operator in it, a professional in it, the way that you would train and practice and show up every day for any other kind of profession.
Oh yeah. And that's it's interesting because with a family, and for those of you that have kids at home and dogs and spouses and all the rest of it, if you're not actually sitting there typing, kind of like maybe if you're not painting, or if you're not physically engaged in the act of sculpting something, people think that you're not actually working.
Yes, but thinking is working.
Yes, that is not the case. You have to think through these things. So for this latest book, I started renting Airbnbs around Park City, and I found this great little log cabin that had a stack of wood outside. So I'd chop wood out there, I'd throw it in the wood burning stove. There was a couch right there, a little table, a kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, but that was it. And it was all close right there. So I could go from one thing to the other. And as I was typing away, or I started to think, got all hungry, I'd go make a sandwich, but I'm still, even though I'm not physically typing,
sure,
I'm still thinking through what's going on that written page, thinking through some problems I need to solve on that written page. So it's still work, but it's interesting when people see you not physically writing, it's like, oh, you're not working right now. Boom, 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 boom.
Well, I think you have to let the subconscious work on the thing, right? Yeah. So it's like there's kind of two phases of doing it. There's the, I'm intentionally thinking about this, I'm writing right now. And then there's also the, it's in there in the back of my mind. It's working on the equation. The computer is chipping away at it, and then the sort of breakthrough happens when you kind of least expect it.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have to be thinking. I mean, you're thinking about it all the time, but it's those interruptions that take you away from it, that make you focus on something else for a minute. For me, that's, I don't know how it is for everybody else, but for me, that's the real killer. Like I need to be. It doesn't matter if I have just a blank white wall in front of me. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a great, beautiful view of mountains or an ocean or anything like that. Blank wall is fine, sure, as long as it's quiet and there's no interruptions. And for those who went to work during COVID at home, they might be able to relate to the fact that if you have a home office and you close that door, for whatever reason, it acts as a magnet for children, for dogs, for everybody. It's just like, I don't know what it is. Like, they don't want to talk to you when the door's open, but it's closed. It's like, so that's just kind of how it goes. And everybody had to experience a little bit of that, especially in the early days of COVID, I think.
Yeah. So talk to me about the transition, because when I talk to athletes and people who are in the armed forces, that's the transitioning out to the new thing, which I actually think they have a sort of a unique set of experiences that can help people, because we're all transitioning from one thing to another, new role. How did you think about, sort of that, like special forces to, I can identify as a writer? Walk me through that transition for you.
Yeah, well, I was very lucky in that I knew what I wanted to do. And a lot of people, I don't think they really know. And if they think they know maybe from a movie or from maybe a book that they read or something they heard from somebody else. And then they devote, let's just take law. So you're transitioning from something and you saw Law and Order on TV, or you read a John Grisham book or a Scott Turow book, and you're like, I'm going to do that. And then you spend this time in law school, and then you get to your first firm, or you go into your DA's office or whatever, and it's not quite what it was like when you watched the movie The Firm. Right. And then you're like, well, I've invested all this time. It's not really what I thought, but I guess now I'm going to pay back this loan, or I'm going to have a family and a child and all this stuff, and you're just off you go, and you're kind of in this thing that wasn't really your calling, or you thought it was,
or was
you
your
didn't
calling for a
understand.
while, right? Like sometimes we do things, there's a season or a phase of your life, and then that phase ends and you have to do the next thing.
Yeah. So I was just very lucky that I knew that writing was my thing. It was already my passion. I'd already spent so many years essentially giving myself an early education in the art of storytelling by reading all these books growing up. My mom introduced me to Joseph Campbell and Hero with a Thousand Faces through this series of interviews that Bill Moyers did with Joseph Campbell called The Power of Myth in, I think, 1988. But I was enthralled because as a kid, he talked about how it inspired George Lucas for Star Wars and this mythology of the hero's journey journey and all this. So I took that on board very early. I didn't find that later in life and then say, maybe I can work this into a story or something like that.
Sure.
Maybe I should give this writing thing a try. It was already, this foundation was already built. So that foundation was built with reading as a fan. Even though I was studying it, I didn't look at it as studying it. I just looked at it as coming at it from the fan's perspective. And then I had this study of warfare. So I'm studying all these warfare and terrorism insurgencies and counterinsurgencies academically. And then I get into the SEAL teams. And then September 11th happens and I go to Iraq and I go to Afghanistan. And then I get to practically apply that warfare. And so now as I'm getting out, I have that foundation that's been built up over all these years. And now I can put all of that into my writing. So it becomes very personal, even though it's complete fiction. I get to go and think about if my character gets ambushed, let's say in Los Angeles, California, I can go think about Baghdad 2006 and think about what it was like to get ambushed there. And I can take those feelings and emotions and then apply them to a completely fictional narrative. So it rings true. I don't have to go track down a sniper from Ramadi in 2006 and then ask them questions and then have those answers get filtered through whatever biases or preconceived notions or maybe other books or movies I've read about sniping or about about Ramadi in 2006. I can just directly translate what it was like to drop over the wall of our compound and move into the city with a small sniper team. And I can just put that directly into the novel without any sort of filters. So I was lucky in that I knew what I wanted to do. My passion is writing. My mission is taking care of my family. That gives me my purpose driving forward. And I think a lot of people, regardless of what they do, whether they're coming from special operations or they're coming from a professional sports team or they're an Olympic athlete and they didn't make the team for the first time and they've been devoted to that for so long, or that maybe a death of a loved one, divorce, just a job transition, any of those things, I think it's so important to identify that passion and that mission so you can find that purpose and move forward.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would phrase that as lucky. To me, that's strategic, right? So I think it's like the worst way to find a new job is to first quit your old job, right? Because now you don't have I think about it as like, you got to figure out the next thing so you can train, so you can think about it. Yeah. So also the education can be subsidized. Like I tell this even to people that work for me, is like, whatever you do next, like there should be like a year period where you've decided to do that thing. And then what can you get out of that time? Like I spent a year at American Apparel. Very clearly I was going to leave to become a writer, but Robert Greene was like, what are you going to do with this year? Yeah. Right. How is that year going to subsidize and educate you and set in motion the stuff that you're going to need? Like, so you're not starting on day one where like, I'm building this thing from scratch, right? You want to learn the things, see the things, save the money, etc. You got to start the transition before you leave, right? Before you jump, I hate this, I don't want to do this, I'm leaving. Then I'm going to figure out that thing. I think you start the transition early. Oh yeah, and I was very fortunate in that in the military, once you tell them you're getting out. So I started as an enlisted, and then I became an officer. And as an officer, you drop your papers and tell them you're getting out, and essentially you go in this other pile, and you go in that pile of now it's your time to get out, and you're kind of off our radar, and you go stand in line at medical, you go stand in line at dental, you go to these transition program things, you get read out of secret programs, you turn in gear. And before you do any of those things, because it's a gigantic bureaucracy, you stand in line to make your appointment to come back and do those things. Sure. So I had a little time on exactly. So I had this time, I was in this other pile where I'm not really on anyone's radar. And then it gave me time to write. So I had exactly what you're talking about there this time. And I made use of that time to write that first book and make it as good as I possibly could. Yeah, Robert said it's going to be alive time or dead time. You get to decide, right? Is it a dead year where you're getting paid, you're not doing anything? Or is it a year where you're doing X, Y, and Z? I think also I thought about that during COVID. Like, okay, these things are now off the table. What do you have to show for that time? And then people go, I can't wait to do this. But they're not actually starting the thing. Marcus Aurelius talks about this in Meditations. He says, like, you could be good today, but you choose tomorrow. You're like, and Pressfield talks about this in The War of Art. It's like, nobody says like, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. They say, I'm going to start later. Right. But you have to do the warm-up phase. You have to do the prep while ideally someone is picking up the tab. Yeah, that's very helpful if you're in that kind of a position. But sometimes there's so many authors out there that they get up so early and they work and then they go to their job and then they come home, or then they write so late. And there's so many stories of people doing that until they get that first novel done. And then they start going to Thriller Fest or BoucherCon or these different events where you can sit down with agents and you do speed dating with agents and you talk to them for 5 minutes, and you go to the next one and the next one. And I know so many people who have found agents that way rather than with the query letter that you send out and who knows if it's actually going to get there. And it just allows you to kind of tailor. It's just educating yourself on what you want to do next rather than just hopping right in, but just educating yourself, taking a break,
breath, looking at it, making some strategic plays, like putting aside that time to go to Thriller Fest, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, get to know people who are then going to give you a blurb because you have that emotional connection to them and that relationship built very naturally. So it's there's a lot of things that you can do strategically rather than just say, oh, I don't know anyone in Hollywood. I don't know anyone in publishing. I guess I better not even start because I don't even know if I had something where to send it. And I think a lot of people just don't even start for that reason.
Well, I'm curious, like whenever someone does something that's sort of very far afield from what they've done before, like how did they know they could do it, right? And I saw a post you did a while ago where you're like, when I was thinking of the terminal list, you're like, this is the actor who's going to play it. This is who my publisher was going to be. This like, so you could see that 2 ways. One, there's a kind of an ego in it. Like, of course, all these people should work for me. There's also a kind of like a planning and a strategy to it. So like when I see people who are thinking about doing some hard thing, like I want to start a company or I want to write a script or I want to do a book or I want to start my own business, that tension between like, of course I can do it. And of course it's going to go all the ways that I want it to go. And this sort of humility of like, this is going to be really hard and I'm not sure if I can do it. How did you think about, like you said you knew, but did you really know, like were those dreams or like, and you were like, I'm going to work really hard to make that real? Or was there some part of you that was like, kind of like believed it was a destiny or something?
I think maybe a little bit of naivete, perhaps, which can also play into your favor because you don't overthink it. And when I wanted to do something for so long, from my earliest days, it was just in my head as, of course, this will happen. So I never wasted bandwidth on worrying about it not happening.
Yeah.
And people have done it before me. And so I see people's names. There's a lot of names on that New York Times list in the #1 spot that we've seen there for 30, sometimes 40 years.
Some of them are dead.
And some of them are, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got Tom Clancy up there. You have Robert Ludlum up there. You have these estates continuing these characters in many cases, Vince Flynn. So you have that as well. But I saw, hey, someone did this before, just like in SEAL training. Someone made it through this.
Yes.
I'm going to make it through also.
Yes.
So it's as simple as that in my head anyway. So I'm going to be one of those people that makes it through. It's been done before. Of course I can do it.
There's a Marcus quote I love. He says, if it's humanly possible, know that you can do it also. Right. So it's like, a lot of like, just it feels arrogant, but it's actually true. It's like, look, these people aren't special. I think when you meet an author for the first time, you're like, oh, you're not this like genius who this is a job. You figured out how to do this thing. I think you sort of realizing like it can be done, and the proof is like lots of people have done it.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things where obviously you have to put in the work, but you can also waste time studying how to do something almost too much. And it's going to be different for everybody, but you can read tons of books on how to write. You can go online and read tons of blogs on how to do something and spend the rest of your life really just doing that. But what I did is I went to the back of some of the books that I really liked. So I saw, why is Vince Flynn thanking Emily Bestler at Emily Bestler Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster? And why is Brad Thor thanking the same Emily Bestler person? And I thought, she will be my editor and publisher. And she didn't know me yet. I had no connection to publishing. And then same thing with Chris Pratt in the show. I just thought, okay, who's that actor that needs to play my character? I'm not even published yet. I'm just typing away in the first couple of chapters. And I thought, Chris Pratt. Yeah, he'll do it. That's the guy. He was in Parks and Rec, and then he was rolling Zero Dark 30 as a SEAL. So I got to see that transformation that he took from Andy Dwyer to being the SEAL in Zero Dark 30. And I thought, well, he'll play Navy SEAL sniper James Reece. Yep. And then I thought, well, it's only natural to pick my director since I'm doing all this, as I'm typing away. And I think, well, Antoine Fuqua, he's amazing. I love everything that he's ever done. I love what he did with Shooter, Point of Impact, even though it's different than the book. I still loved it. Obviously, Training Day, incredible. Replacement Killers, And I thought, yeah, he'll be the director. And then I just kept writing, and that's all the thought that I gave to those things. And then a friend on the publishing side of the house asked me one day. I was about a year away from getting out, and he said, "Hey, do you think Brad Thor? You'd like to talk to Brad Thor?" And I said,
"Nah."
Would he talk to me? Are you kidding? Well, first he asked me, "Do you know who Brad Thor is?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you think you'd like to talk to him?" I said, "That'd be amazing. Would he talk to me?" I never thought in a million years that someone would talk to me. And he said, "Yeah, let me set it up." And I said, "Oh, geez." They'd sat next to each other at a banquet, and my friend had one of these foundation banquets, and he'd helped Brad with the SEAL portions of a few of his books. and set up this call. And now I know how often that authors get asked about these sorts of things. But at the time, I just made sure that I was in the right place at the right time, ready for that call. I was in Los Angeles, and I was in this corner of a parking lot. And I remember I was in my Land Cruiser, and there's no air conditioning, and it's really loud if you have it on. So I wanted it to be quiet. So I'm just baking in this car, sweat's dripping onto my legal pad. And we had this great conversation where it was essentially a job interview. And he asked me why I wanted to write and all those sorts of things. And I talked to him about my mom being a librarian and this love of reading and all of that. And he finally said, "Hey, stop talking. I have work to do." But he's like, "Hey, if you write this thing, your friend told me some of the things that you did in the SEAL teams. And as a thank you for that, if you write this thing, I'll let Emily Bestler at Simon & Schuster know that it's coming." And I said, "That's all I need." And he said, "When's it going to be done?" And I said, "A year from today." And he said, "Don't call me through it this year. I'm not going to give you any advice. I'm not going to give you any encouragement. But if you write it, let me know." And called him back a year to that day and said, "Hey, it's done." And he remembered me. And he said, "Is it done or is it as good as it can possibly be?" Ooh. And I said, "Well, I could probably spend a few more months," because I came like skidding into home plate type of a thing just to make that deadline, my first deadline. And he said, "Take your time, make it the best you can make it, and then we'll send it in." And I said, "Roger that." So I spent another 4 months editing. And then called him back in November of 2016 and said, "Hey, it's as good as I can get it." And he said, "Okay, I'll let him know." So sent it in, and Emily read it. And Brad thought that she'd read it and read the first sentence or two and say, "Brad, what do you want me to tell this guy?" But instead, she loved it and wanted to publish it. And so next thing you know, I go to New York and
it's worked out all right for her too.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's been fantastic. And then on the series side of the house with Chris Pratt, books coming out. There's this, it's not even published yet, but there's this galley copy, which is like a rough draft that comes out in ahead of publication. And I get a call from my friend Jared Shaw. And he calls me out of the blue and he asked me if I remember him, which of course I do. And then he said, "Do you remember what you did for me in the SEAL teams?" And I did not. And he said, "Well, you sat me down in your office, talked about transitioning out of the military. You introduced me to people in the private sector, and no one else did that. And I always wanted to thank you." And I said, "No problem. How's it going?" And he said, "It's going great, but I heard you have a book coming out."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, it's coming out in about 5 months. I have a rough draft I can send you." And he said, "I'd like that, but I'd like to give it to a friend of mine." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt." And I was like, "Oh." So I sent it to him. He read it just to make sure it wasn't horrible.
Yeah.
And then he gave it to Chris in December of 2017. And Chris read it at the end of December and called the next week and wanted to option it. So, and Antoine got it essentially the same week. He got it through another friend, a SEAL, who they'd worked together in Hollywood. Gave it to Antoine. Antoine wanted to do it as well. So he called Chris and said, "Let's do this thing together." And Chris said yes. And now we're all executive producers on it. And Jared Shaw acts in it, is an advisor in it, is a producer in it. And he made it really what it is because he was on set every single day to make sure it was rooted in the dark, gritty, primal, authentic nature of the novel. So without him there every day, and without Max Adams, who's a former Army Ranger and a writer there every day, and our other friend Ray Mendoza there every day, who does technical advising in Hollywood, those three guys were on set every day, and they were so invested in it. It would be a completely different show without those three involved.
One of the through lines I see through that story, and it's a piece of advice I got from Tim Ferriss, is like, treat everyone like they can put you on the front page of the New York Times, because eventually you'll meet that person.
Interesting.
Right? And so I think about the favors that people were doing, you for your friend, Brad Thor for you, right? And you think about, you don't know at the time where this person's going to end up, what's going to happen, what opportunity they're going to come to you. But if I think as a general rule, if you help people, it ends up helping you in the long run.
Yeah, probably. And I don't think any of us ever thought about it in those terms. I was just, Jared was an amazing SEAL and just was going to help him whether he stays in or gets out. My other friend that sat next to Brad Thor, like he knew me mostly by reputation. We knew each other, but he knew me really by reputation in the teams and was really willing to risk his political capital on me. So that's a part of it. So you can't expect these things to happen, or I guess a better way to put it is you have to be ready.
Yeah,
so when someone cracks that door, you can kick it in. You have to have done that work that allows someone to want to risk their political capital on you to make that introduction or to crack that door. Because if you're just want and haven't done the work, no one's going to risk their capital on you to help you up. And but you have to be ready. You got to be ready to kick that door. You got to be ready to breach it.
Well, speaking of doing the work, there's a military maxim that I'm sure you know, which is that amateurs talk about strategies, pros talk about logistics. Yeah. I think I see that with writing, where amateurs talk a lot about tools, right? Like, what's the right notepad I should use? What's the right software? They want to know, like, sort of specifically how you do it. And it's like, really the way you did it was you spent 20 years getting the experiences, and then you sat down and you put your ass in the chair for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. So I think people often, they sort of mythologize like, oh, what kind of typewriter did Hemingway use? Which really, in the end of the day, doesn't matter. What matters is the sort of sitting down and doing the work of it, whatever that thing is.
So this is true. But I did do a little bit of that. And so when I talked to Brad Thor that first time, I was going through some elicitation. So for those who have been in the human side of the intelligence services, I somehow managed to work in what kind of font does Emily Bestler like? What kind of spacing? So when it arrived, does she like it bound? Does she like it electronic? So I sent it to her exactly the way she would have her assistant turn it into if she had asked it for it. So it's the font, the spacings, the margins, not being bound but just being stacked up right there. So I sent it to her exactly the way that she would want to have received it, in a professional way. So who knows if that helped or not? But
no, I think that's a big part. A lot of people get so consumed with what they want to do and their thing that they don't stop and think about the other person in the transaction or in the fight or the argument or whatever the adversary, right? You don't think about like what's going through their mind. How are they? Yeah. And I often just like think about how many stacks of manuscripts this person has to go through. Think of the crap that gets thrown. Think about how much bad stuff they see, right? And really thinking about what the world looks like from the other person's perspective. This more than just being empathetic and nice is also like how you succeed because you thought about priming it so it actually works.
Yeah. It's I mean, what a crazy journey. But with Emily Bestler at Simon & Schuster, I thought, hey, if Emily Bestler wants to put aliens from outer space coming down in this thing and turn this into Transformers, guess what I'm going to do? They're going to be Transformers in this thing.
Yeah, sure.
And but she didn't want to change anything. She asked me, hey, would he really say this here? Would he do this here? And a third thing I can't really remember right now. But those were her content edits for the entire first novel. And it's been the same for all of them. Very few content type edits. And I think that's because I stayed true to the theme. I put that from Stephen Pressfield again. Yeah. I misinterpreted something he said on Joe Rogan. He was really talking about a playwright in New York writing a couple sentences down to keep him on